Good morning. Today we are looking at 3.1, which is solving one-step equations. This is something that we're going to use over and over and over again, so make sure you're following along, following the process, and asking questions when you have questions. First, what we're going to do is talk about inverse operations. Inverse operations are operations that undo each other, so I might say, what's the opposite of addition, or the inverse? They undo each other. So to undo addition, the opposite would be subtraction. Like thinking, if I give you a night pride ticket, to take that away would be to subtract it. Now you're back to where we started. Same thing with subtraction. The opposite of subtraction would be addition. They're inverses of each other. Addition and subtraction go together. Then multiply. I'm going to multiply something. The opposite of multiplying. If you're unsure, look at PEMDAS too. These two go together in the order of operations. Multiplication is the opposite of division. Therefore, the opposite of division is multiplication. This last one's a little bit tricky. This is looking at just a fraction. The opposite of a fraction, some of you, I've heard the answers before, like a decimal or a percent. However, both of those are just the same, or different ways to write the same piece of information. For example, the fraction 1/2 as a decimal is 0.5. As a percent, that's 50%. Those are all the same thing. If I gave you half of a cookie, or 0.5 of a cookie, or 50% of a cookie, they're all representing the same part. So to undo that fraction in an equation, which we're going to look at today, the opposite of it is going to be multiplying. Remember, the dot means multiply, by the reciprocal. Some of you might be thinking, what is a reciprocal? A reciprocal is just when you take the fraction and you flip it. So instead of 1/2, it'd be 2/1. So before we get started looking at these, I want to take a look at what does balanced look like. So if you're going to go to the gym and work out, and you're only lifting this arm over and over and over again, you're going to be pretty weak in this arm over here. So in order to be balanced, if we're going to lift 10 pounds over here, we need to lift 10 pounds over here. Same thing like with this guy. This guy is balanced. This guy is not. We need to be balanced. Yes. He has a whole bunch of weight over here, let's say 40 pounds, and another 40 pounds over here. He is balanced. Whatever he's doing on one side of his body, he's got to do to the other. We have to do the same thing with equations. Here's another way to think of, are we balanced or not? If I was to take off one big blue weight on the left side, I would have to take off one blue weight on the right side. And now they're balanced again. If I take off two little yellow weights, 1, 2, I have to take 2 yellow weights off of the right side as well to be balanced. If I want to add one big blue, I have to add one blue on the left. So whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. When we get to equations, we're going to end up drawing a line down the middle, so we know whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So just because it's a little bit funny, I'm going to have you watch this short little video about what balanced and unbalanced looks like. So these aren't in English, but you get the idea.
Jetzt kriegt er noch aus dem Oben. Jetzt geht er langsam. Jetzt kommt er. Einer müsste von der runter, oder? Noch nicht. Wir werden das nicht laufen. Also einer muss Guido, strammst du. Wo ist Guido? Hey, bitte. Guido, gut. Langsam. Nein, er kommt auch noch.
Alright, let's get back to our lesson. So now we are going to focus on solving equations. Our step one, we're going to think of this really as our setup, how we're going to set up our problem. First thing we're always going to do is to draw a line down the middle. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other, just like lifting weights. Our goal is to get this letter Y all by itself. So I'm going to circle that. That's what I want to get all by itself. And right now I want the letter to end up on the left because it's already over here. And I want the numbers or the constants to end up on the right. Well, right now this number 7 needs to go over with the other numbers. So I need to do the opposite or the inverse of what I see. So the opposite of a positive 7 would be subtract 7. So if I'm going to subtract 7 over here, I have to subtract 7 over here. I'm going to draw a line because now I'm simplifying or solving. We have Y left over, and 10 minus 7 should give us 3. And some of you might be able to do in your head 3 plus 7 equals 10. However, it's about the process. Okay? I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. But right now, follow the process. First thing, we're going to set up our equation. Draw your line down. We want to get G all by itself. Since G's over here, we want the letters on this side and the constants on the left. So we need to do the opposite of what we see. I see multiply here because these are touching. The opposite of multiply is divide. So instead of doing the dot dot divide by 2, I'm going to just do the line, which means divide by 2. Divide by 2. A short little line there. So 2 over 2 is just 1. So we have 1g. We don't really need to write the 1 because we know there's 1g here. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So our answer is 3. Down here, same thing. Let's set it up. Draw your line down. We want to get p all by itself. This negative goes with the 22. The opposite of a negative 22 would be a positive 22. Whatever you do to one side, we have to do to the other. So 22 minus 22 is 0. So we have p. And we're going to subtract here 16 minus 22. However, they're different signs. We know there's going to be more negatives. 22 is a bigger negative number. It's really 22 minus 16, and then take the sign of the bigger number. So I'm borrowing 12 minus 6 is 6, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So we have 6 left over, and it's a negative. If you wanted to just count up from 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, there were 6 numbers there, and they're all negatives. Next, this one, draw your line down. Let's set this up. We want to get x all by itself. Here is where we want our letter. Here is our numbers, our constants. And I see this line. This line really here means divide. So the opposite of divide is going to be multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides. Now this 2 is really on the top of our fraction because it's 2 over 1. So 2 over 2 is just 1. So we have x equals, and then 8 times 2 is 16. And like I said, a common question I have is, but why? Why can't I just do this in my head? Well, the reason is because eventually this is what we're going to get to. We're going to have multi-step equations where we have to distribute and move things from side to side. Right now what we're looking at is just this last step. Like here we have negative 27p equals negative 39. We see multiply, we'd have to divide. Then we're going to add on and make it a 2-step equation. And then a multi-step or a 3 or more step equation, and so on. So that's why I'm saying, no, you can't just do this in your head. We need to show our work. So flip over to the back side. Our setup is really step 1. Draw your line down. We want to get y all by itself. And y, our letter, is over here, and so our rest of our numbers, our constants, are going to be on this side. Don't think add. Some of you might see, oh, I see subtraction, I'm going to add. These are really touching. That's really multiply here. So the opposite is going to be divide. Divide by that whole number, negative 5. Divide by negative 5. Well, 5 over 5 is just 1. So we have y. We know two grumpy people get along, -6 and -5. And so 65 divided by 5, well, I know 5 goes into 60 12 times like a clock. And so one more would be 13. If you're not sure, just use your calculator. Next, same thing, set it up, draw your line, circle the variable. This is our letter or our variable, and here's our constant. What I see is this line, which means divide. The opposite of divide is multiply. So we're going to multiply by 4 on both sides. So 4 over 4 is just 1, because this is really in the top, so 4 over 1. So we have an n, that's our variable all by itself. And then -2 times 4, well, 4 times 2 is 8, so -8. Alright, set it up, draw your line, circle the variable. Now we want to get this letter t all by itself. So here's our variable, we want our constants on the other side. So do the opposite of what you see. I see a subtract 13. The opposite would be to add 13. So these are gone, make 0. We have t equals, now -16 plus 13, different sign subtract, 16 minus 13 will give us 3, but there's more negatives. If you want, just plug it in your calculator. Over here, same thing, draw your line, we want to get g all by itself. So that's our variable, so we'll have our constants on the right side this time. This 15.7 is really a positive, so the opposite would be to subtract 15.7. Those are eliminated. We have g. These are all negative, same sign, add and keep. So 6 plus 7 is 15. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 1 more is 8. And then 1 plus 1 is 2, and they're all negatives. So our answer is -28.5. Alright, this one's a little bit tricky. We're going to start the same, draw your line, circle the variable. Like before, we're not going to add. This is really multiply. The opposite of multiply is divide. So we're going to divide by this whole term, -11. Divide by -11. We wanted our variables over here and our constant on the left. So that made 1, so we just have t. 0 divided by anything, if we're not sure, look at the poster. Is it okay or no? This one's okay, so your answer is just 0. If it was no, it wouldn't work. That answer would be undefined. Alright, before I look at this next one, we have two negatives next to each other. We know that the opposite of a negative here would make a positive. So I'm going to draw my line. We want k all by itself. The opposite of adding 8 would be subtracting 8. So those are eliminated. We have k. And then 14 take away 8, subtract 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And there's more positive, so it stays positive. Next we have two different types of problems here. This one has a fraction. This one has division. This is the line means divide. This one has a fraction out front. So we're going to approach these differently. But to start out, draw your line, circle the variable. You want the variable on the left this time and the constants on the right. So this, to get rid of this line, the opposite of divide means multiply. So we're going to multiply by 1.3 on both sides. 1.3 over 1.3 makes 1, so we have 1x or just x. And then I'm going to plug this into my calculator. When I plug that in, I get an answer of 9.36. Alright, last on this slide, draw your line. We want to get the y all by itself. Now this one's a fraction. To undo a fraction, if we look back at our first slide, it's too far. The opposite of a fraction is going to be multiplying by the reciprocal. We're multiplying by the fraction that's flipped. So here we have 2 over 3, so we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Instead of 2 over 3, it's going to be 3 over 2. So we're going to multiply by 3 over 2 on both sides. Well, if we really multiplied this, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6, 6 over 6 is just 1. So we have 1y, or just y. If you know 3 over 3 is 1, and 2 over 2 is 1, you get the same thing. It's 1y, or just y. Over here, 10 is 10 over 1. 10 times 3 on the top would give us 30. 1 times 2 on the bottom would give us 2. So we have 30 divided by 2. So 30 divided by 2, or what's half of 30? Half of 30 would be 15. Couple more. Draw your line down. Circle the variable. We want the variables on the right this time, and the constants on the left. I see this line. This line means divide. The opposite of divide is multiply. So we're multiplying by 2 on both sides. 2 over 2 is just 1, because that's really 2 over 1. So we have x, and 8 times 2, which is 16. Same thing but different. This one, here's h, our variable. We want our constant on the right. So we need to get rid of this 1/2. In order to get rid of a fraction, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Flip the fraction, 2 over 1 on both sides. 2 over 2 makes 1. 1 over 1 is just 1. So we have h. And then we're going to multiply. Negative 14 times 2. If we double 14, we get 28. And 1 times 1 on the bottom is just 1. Well, 28 divided by 1 is still 28, but it's negative. Alright, a couple more fraction ones. Multiply by the reciprocal to get rid of our fraction here. Our variables on the right, our constants on the left. So instead of multiplying by 2/5, we're multiplying by 5 over 2 times 5 over 2. 5 over 5 is just 1. 2 over 2 is just 1. So we have a. And then this is 30 over 1. 5 times 30, well 5 times 3 is 15 with a 0, 150. And then on the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. If you're not sure, use your calculator. 150 divided by 2, we know it's going to be a negative. It should be a negative 75. Last two on this page. We're getting good at those fractions. Circle our variable. We want the variable on the left and the constant on the right. So to get rid of our fraction, just like we've been doing, we're multiplying by the reciprocal. 3 over 2 times 3 over 2. Some of you might be thinking, well, this one looks different than the last couple, because this one, the letter was just next to it in between. If the letter is on top or next to it here, it means the same thing, because x could be x over 1. They could put it on the top of the fraction or out front, but they will never put it on the bottom, okay? So just treat it like a fraction. This is 2 over 2 makes 1, 3 over 3 makes 1, so we just have f. So we have 14 times 3, it's going to give us 42. And then 1 times 2 is 2. So we have 42 divided by 2. So if we plug that in our calculator, half of 40 would be 20, half of 2 would be 1. 21. Last one. Circle our variable. We want the variables on the left, and we want our constant, or just our numbers, on the right. Now this negative 3.5, the negative you can either put on the top or the bottom, but it needs to go with one of the two numbers, not both, because two negatives would make a positive, and we want it to be negative. So if we're going to get rid of this fraction, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, and our reciprocal is 5 over negative 3 times 5 over negative 3. So 5 over 5, 3 over 3, they just make 1. So we have x. Negative 27 times 5. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to plug it in my calculator. And I get 135 negative. Oops, negative 135. And on the bottom, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. Well, I know two negatives are going to make a positive. And if I divide that in my calculator, I get 45. Last slide here. So we have our A, which is 72 centimeters squared, which is really the area. It says find x given the area. Well, this shape is a triangle. We know that the area of a triangle is base times height divided by 2. So let's fill in the parts we know. We know the area is right here, 72. The base of the triangle right here is 16. Times the height, which we don't know, but they're giving us the letter x. And then we're going to divide it by 2. So this is one thing that we did not learn before. If we just have multiplication and division, we can actually simplify this 16 divided by 2, which is really just 8. So this is really 72 equals 8x. So now, if we want to get x all by itself, this is multiply, the opposite would be divide by 8. So 72 divided by 8 would give us 9. Even better would be if you put cm for centimeters on there. So the height right here is 9 centimeters. Over here, area for a rectangle is just base times height. So our area we know is 54. Don't include units on this, just add your units at the end. Our base right here is 12 times our height, which we don't know, it's x. So we want x all by itself. The opposite of multiply here is divide. 12 over 12 is just 1, or x. And then 54 divided by 12 is going to give us a decimal. In my calculator, it gave me 4.5. 4.5, this one is inches. Last problem, there is one like this on your homework as well. It says a bowling lane has an area of 304 square feet. What that means is when you go bowling, this is where you stand. And then down here are where the pins are. My best. And you throw the ball down the lane. Try and knock over the pins. So it says it has an area of 304 square feet. The width of the lane is 4 feet, so how wide it is that you're standing there is 4. What is the length of the lane? We don't know what this is. I'm going to use x. So this is a rectangle, so we know the area of a rectangle is base times height. So our area is 304. Our base is x, and our other side is 4. So to get x by itself, the opposite of multiplying would be divide. 4 over 4 is just 1. So we have 304 divided by 4, which would give us 76. They were talking about feet, so you could put feet on there if you would like. Alright, your homework is out of the book, if I can, or not out of the book, goodness, is this worksheet right here. Go ahead and get started.